Once again, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to welcome you to today's Source Media Web Seminar, which is being sponsored by MajescoMastek and is hosted by the Insurance Networking News. Joining us today is Pat Spear. Pat, you now have the floor.
Thanks, Ryan. You know, we've done a lot of reporting in the past couple of months on the state of the insurance industry from both today's perspective as well as what we can expect in the future. And we're doing this reporting against a backdrop of, unfortunately, great economic uncertainty. We've confirmed that most insurers across all lines of business are operating relatively flat in 2009, so IT spend decisions have to be smarter than ever. These same insurers, are facing some tough decisions concerning cost reduction and efficiency improvements. And the same insurers are facing what our top analysts and industry experts are calling a perfect storm, because the demand for cost reduction and increased efficiencies happens to occur at a time when technology trends are pointing them in a new direction that really will make these things possible. So what does it take to make smart decisions when it comes to a huge undertaking, such as a core systems upgrade? Well, our speakers today are going to enlighten us on the advantages of creating a predictable, manageable IT environment that can support core systems, and they can support them in a way that lowers the total cost of ownership and capital investment, while at the same time streamlining operations and deployment of product offerings. Sounds too good to be true, doesn't it? Well, we're about to find out. I'm going to introduce all three of our speakers up front, and to make this web seminar as interactive as possible for everyone, we'll be eliciting your responses with a couple of polling questions along the way. And as I told you, we'll hold some time out at the end, and Ryan also mentioned this, for our speakers to be able to answer some of your questions. So I encourage you, if you have a question along the way, please type it in the box at any time along the way, and then we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. Our first speaker this afternoon is Craig Weber, Senior Vice President of Celent's insurance practice. Craig is one of those well-known industry experts I just mentioned. At Celent, he has placed a deep focus on insurance trends, policy admin, distribution issues, and new business. And many of you have seen his annual independent producer surveys. But you might not know that he's the primary author of a very popular publication called Insurance Software Deal Trends. And these studies are something that our readers rely on as they formulate their business and IT strategies each year. Craig's work with insurance clients of late includes policy admin and new business vendor analysis, an assessment of potential document automation strategies, and the creation of custom versions of Celent's producer survey. In addition to being a familiar presenter at industry events, Craig's comments on insurance and technology topics have appeared in numerous publications, including the Chicago Tribune, USA Today, and of course, Insurance Networking News. Next on the agenda is Tom Hardy, President and CEO of Unity Financial Life Insurance Company. Tom is a seasoned veteran in the insurance industry with more than 35 years of service in a variety of C-level executive leadership roles, all of which have tended to funnel the companies he's worked for into positions of great growth. His efforts at each of 4 different insurance organizations resulted in those companies seeing substantial growth in sales, earnings, and return on equity. And his efforts in building business operations at Mayflower National Life resulted in that company becoming one of the leading insurance companies in its space. I think it's safe to say that Tom lives and breathes insurance. He's a certified property casualty underwriter, a certified life underwriter, and a fellow of the Life Management Institute. Tom obviously takes his dedication to the industry seriously. Having invested in Unity Financial, he's moved the company to Cincinnati, and he's driving it to a position of its current success. Last but not least, we're going to hear from Erik Stockwell, MajescoMastek Senior Vice President and General Manager for the company's North American Life Annuity Division. Erik brings more than 15 years of insurance industry experience to the day of today. And like Tom, Erik has a history of fueling growth and innovation within the organizations where he's worked, and has line of business management and leadership experience at Nationwide, The Hartford, and Transamerica. While at these companies, he's developed and managed various teams in product development, sales, and finance. And Erik is also a chartered life underwriter. So without further ado, let's get started with our very first speaker, Craig Weber. Craig, you have the floor.
Thanks, Pat. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you today to share some comments around some potential approaches to help insurance carriers get at some of the technology and strategy issues they're facing. And I want to start with some comments broadly about the financial crisis and where it has taken the insurance industry. It's kind of interesting that almost any topic these days should have an intro slide or two like the next couple that I'm going to show you, just because it helps get us all oriented toward the changed world that we live in. I'd like to say in response to questions of all types, you can make an argument to have one type of response or another. And generally that's not, the question is not which response you choose, it's that you choose one and explicitly choose one. So I would say inaction is probably not an option for most carriers, and that's why this conversation has, I think, such import for us today. So first, just what you're seeing here is a few areas specifically that we believe are clearly impacted from the financial crisis. And we saw this going back into October or so. We initially published a report on the market crisis in early October. And many of these trends have not abated since October. They have strengthened. So we see things like the amount of loss that carriers are facing. Carriers, and this is across lines of business, by the way, all lines of business are suffering loss issues. As the economic trouble tightens, we see losses rising. Pricing power continues to show softness in the property casualty lines. We do think eventually it will harden and turn around, and we're starting to see some signs of that. But for right now, price is not the lever that most carriers can wield to deal with some of the financial issues that they're facing. Financial results generally have been poor, and we've seen just release after release, earnings report after earnings report from carriers of all types across all lines. Financial results are generally just a string of bad news these days. As a result of some of the investment issues, we've seen problems with capitalization, solvency, some pressure coming on carriers to get their financial house in order because their assets aren't worth what they thought they were. As a result of that, you can kind of feel this building to a crescendo. We expect to see regulation and rating scrutiny. So rating agencies will be much quicker to pull the trigger on companies that they feel are not positioning themselves well. And finally, and we've started to get a sense of this happening, I expect to see much more of it throughout the rest of this year, mergers and acquisitions. Companies getting out of lines of business they're in, sometimes whole companies being bought up. It's going to be a wild and crazy ride here for the next few months. So we suggest that everybody get their seatbelts on for the ride. So how does the financial industry and the insurance industry specifically respond? Well, we believe that in terms of broad strategy, insurance carriers have the same palette of options that they've always had. They can get bigger, write more business, spread those expenses out over a larger base. They can get leaner, help cut expenses, take steps to trim the fat, as it were. They can get smarter. They can write smarter risk. They can evaluate risk more carefully. They can price it more finitely. There are all kinds of options that will improve those results. Now, these are not new options, and they certainly, in some cases, have been tapped out over the last few years, particularly on the expense side using existing approaches. Come back to that a little bit toward the end of my presentation here. But we do think that palette of options in front of them, most insurers are starting to make changes now. So they're changing their corporate goals and objectives. They're looking at a different mix of strategies that address those goals and objectives. And really, most importantly for this conversation, they're looking at the tactical focus that will help them address those strategies. So they're doing very concrete things to address some of the problems that are facing them. Now, one way to do that, we think, is useful. It's useful to have a framework to think about how you're changing those tactics, is to break out your IT portfolio, your IT projects, into a number of categories, and I've suggested a few options here, and explicitly decide whether they belong in the tactical column or in the strategic column. And Celent argues that you really need some of both if you are an insurance carrier and you are hoping to thrive. So what would drive something over to the strategic column here? That would be longer-term projects, projects of great breadth, bigger ideas generally, broader solutions, things that will have a broader business impact. And typically, projects on the strategic side have a soft dollar element in the business case. So things like expense avoidance or opening up new markets, revenue growth, that really, if those are present, that's a pretty good sign that the project belongs in the strategic column. These are things that are critical to an insurance carrier's long-term survival. They want to be in the right market, selling the right products to the right people, having the right business process, and the right ability to support them. Those are all strategic elements. On the other side, tactical are just what you might imagine, shorter-term projects, more of a hard dollar business case, a more direct impact on the budget, meaning a capturable savings. The dollar amount saved should flow right into the budget. And these, we believe, are critical to short-term survival. You can't do things in an inefficient way and survive in the ultra-competitive world that insurance is today. So that raises the thorny issue. How do you do both? How do you get projects that serve tactical value and serve up some strategic value? How do you manage projects that should have returns within a 12-month time frame on the tactical side, and 12 to 24 months, maybe even as much as 60 months on the strategic side? So that is the problem that most people are facing, and we are arguing that by being explicit about how those projects fit into these two categories, insurance carriers will have a better chance of delivering on them. So let me talk just quickly about a couple of types of initiatives here and how we see them falling into those two buckets, tactical and strategic. First, I've got some core systems initiatives listed here, typical things that we see often in our consulting practice at Celent: policy administration, system replacement. Is that tactical or strategic? We think it's largely a strategic project. Hard to deliver results in less than 18 months. Typically, full-on results are well out from that, 24, even 36 months out. Clearly, broad, sweeping projects, visionary projects belong in the strategic bucket. Policy administration system rationalization, taking a few different systems and either combining them, putting lines of business together, front-ending policy admin systems. This, again, I call this a strategic type of initiative. I probably could have put half a star under tactical. There are some short-term savings to be gained there. New claims system, new business system has both elements. You can help manage your volume better. You can help reduce staffing potentially, but certainly there are longer-term strategic values to be served by those projects as well. Now take a look at technology and sourcing initiatives. Initiatives of a slightly different flavor here. Information technology outsourcing, ITO, the first category. Call this largely a tactical initiative. And there's a reason for that. It's because it's been around a very long time, and this sponge has been wrung out pretty well. But when you get to the other two items on here, really the focus of today's webinar, BPO, business process outsourcing, and ASP, or software as a service, very strong strategic elements on the one hand, long-term vision for making results cost variable, for allowing much faster response to market changes. Those are very clearly strategic elements of these projects. Also, I believe, some very good tactical benefits to be gained in the short run. ASP in software as a service particularly can, under the right circumstances, deliver results rather quickly. That is why we believe this is an emerging area that is rather interesting in the times of trouble that we find ourselves in. Something like rethinking lease strategies on software, the software licensing agreements and the hardware that supports them, that's potentially quite a very interesting short-term tactic that can be taken. So if we are clear about where we're headed, if we're clear about what types of initiatives belong in a strategic category and a tactical category and what the potential benefits are, and I would argue what the mix of those benefits are. Ideally, we would find projects to focus on, to prioritize, that deliver both short and long term. Then what other trends are going on in the insurance technology world that can help us move down a path toward those priority projects? Well, I've listed a few things here, and Pat referenced the term perfect storm, which I think I've used myself a few times, talking about the financial crisis and some of our responses to it. But listed on the left here are some of the problems that we very typically talk about in the insurance IT space. Lack of responsiveness, disconnects between technology and the business. Fortunately, addressing those issues, we see a lot of carriers developing a holistic approach that blends business and IT, that takes into consideration technical issues and business issues and solves the problems in a much more holistic way. A good example of this is the trend toward componentized software that is very much configuration-driven rather than code-driven. That's a more holistic approach that engages both business and IT. Another two trends that we have been lamenting for these many years: legacy baggage, kind of the 30-year tail of the technology and the infrastructure behind the technology, and concerns over skills. What happens when the COBOL programmers all disappear? Well, fortunately, we do see among the core technology players a much improved landscape, a much better ability to handle some of the business functionality without relying on hard coding. So this is another strategy that most carriers, we believe, are employing today. Final problem with IT that we want to look at is a tradition that quashes imagination. It's a pretty strong statement, but I believe it's essentially true that imagination is an important element for most insurance carriers that has been lacking in how they solve technology problems. Fortunately, we do feel there's a major culture shift underway, and most carriers are thinking outside the box in ways that were, frankly, impossible 10 years ago. They've got the tools, but more so the willingness to change, to use those tools. We believe that's a very strong positive step forward for the industry. So how do those trends convert to software as a service? Really the punchline of my presentation today is we believe they all point toward a very good case for software as a service as an approach. And specifically, a few other technology elements play into that positive positioning of the approach. And we've seen some of this emerge through Google, the Google application suite, Salesforce.com. There are great examples outside of insurance. We believe that they are about to penetrate the insurance space as well. So a couple of trends here to talk about: SOA and web services. No great surprise to anyone that they are finally arrived, making an impact, and really kind of getting a foothold in the insurance industry. Result of that, it's easier to integrate a third-party software as a service to your internal systems. You've already got a lot of this infrastructure in place, or at least in planning. Second trend, ubiquitous web applications. It used to be that when we asked a question about how applications were delivered, how interface was managed, it was 50-50 whether you got hard-coded front end or you got a web application. Now we believe end users not only accept a web interface, but really expect them. Virtually all systems are delivered that way, so the flow with software as a service makes perfect sense. Another trend, metadata-driven solutions, meaning systems are not hard-coded in a way that does not allow for reuse of data. This, again, I talked a little bit about the configuration, the rules and tools-based approach. This certainly allows for configuration of the system, but also via the web, remote configuration. You don't need to be sitting next to the server that's serving up your application to make it hum and do what you want it to do. Finally, interactive Web 2.0. Been a lot of interesting developments in advanced web technologies that have improved usability, that have improved throughput, reduced some of the questions about bandwidth. There's just a host of interesting things going on with the technology. And the end result is that we believe web applications can now replace virtually every desktop application. Performance issues, other things, certainly not of the concern that they were. So just to conclude, I want to emphasize that we are in a time of major cliches, and they're all true. When the tough get going, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Make a silk purse, necessity, the mother of invention. It's all true. This is crunch time for insurance and technology. And we believe that the technology trends are there to support major improvements in how we deliver functionality. So we'd like to suggest that carriers should revisit how their IT supports their business strategies. That starts with an understanding of the business strategy, product lines, geographies, business units, and how those things will change, and how technology will deliver on those new promises. I think that's the right order, the right sequencing of those questions, and carriers that push the envelope in answering that second question will be far ahead of the carriers that don't. Finally, rethink those criteria for new initiatives. We believe that an understanding of tactical versus strategic value and explicit understanding is very useful. We believe it helps drive the time horizon for expense control and productivity gains. And we think it also will help carriers get beyond business as usual. These are extraordinary times, and we believe they call for extraordinary answers. I think software as a service, the model, the concept is absolutely primed for action here. And it's the kind of thing that insurance carriers have to be considering if they are to survive in times of turmoil. Well, that concludes my comments. I'll stick around for Q&A. Let me throw it right back to Pat.
Okay, thanks, Craig. Thanks. Great insightful comments. Before we move on to Tom Hardy's presentation, I think we'd like to hear from our audience members, so we're going to conduct a quick polling question. The question is, are you considering ASP, SaaS, which is obviously Application Service Provider, Software as a Service, as an option to replace or upgrade any of your core systems? If yes, in what time frame? All right, you have 4 choices here. The no vote isn't really a choice. So I'd like you to focus on either in the next 6 months, in the next 1 to 2 years. ASP SaaS is not an option. We have no replacement upgrade plans. Again, the question is, are you considering ASP Software as a Service as an option to replace or upgrade any of your core systems? And if yes, in what time frame? I'm going to leave the polls open just another few seconds here because we want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to vote. And then it's looking like the voting is slowing down now somewhat. So, okay, Ryan, why don't you go ahead and close the polls and we'll show the results. Okay, the results are shown. 27% are planning in the next 6 months. 33% of you are planning within the next 1 to 2 years. Only 5% of you are saying that ASP Software as a Service is not an option. And 33% say we have no replacement or upgrade plans presently. All righty. Well, with that, I'm going to move on to our next presenter, Tom Hardy. And it's my pleasure to turn the floor over to you, Tom. Tom, are you with us?
Stand by 1 moment, please.
Okay.
Tom, are you with us?
Yes.
There we go. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, thank you. Unity Financial Life is a small company, so many may not have heard of us. We're in a niche market. We provide insurance policies that are sold through funeral homes to people who have prearranged funerals. Our motivation, though, in looking at a lot of the systems questions here is different from much of the industry in that we're primarily focusing on how to keep supporting success
We have just finished a very good year in 2008 and are quite optimistic about 2009. We have avoided all of the investment bombs, and so we just haven't had any of those problems. And as you can see on the slide, we are small, but we are rapidly growing. The company goes back to 1964, but essentially it was reborn in 2002, which is when I made an investment in it. And so the numbers you see are from 2002 to 2008. And we have grown the premium from $4 million to $25 million, assets from $14 to $75 million. We apparently are the fastest growing privately owned life insurance underwriter in the country, and definitely the fastest in our industry, even though we're by no means the largest in our industry. Our overall philosophy on how we like to operate and deal with our markets is that we want every opportunity for the customer or the agent to see and touch what's happening, that they will be dealing with our employees. So all of the service things that can be done, we do in the home office in Cincinnati. We, of course, issue policies, pay claims, do customer service, take care of the agents, all of that. And for that, we want that direct and very highly trained service. But for all other areas that the customer doesn't see, we are quite happy to outsource, and we do, in fact, outsource quite a number of these: investment management, and then, of course, obviously the one that's relevant right now, the IT function. We do not have any full-time IT staff in our company. We have been using another policy administration system, which was fairly out of date and really did not cover our needs particularly well. It's also difficult for a small company to be able to fill functions that don't truthfully need a full person or don't need a full staff, and that in turn makes it hard to hire good people. If we're not in the field of IT staffing, we aren't likely to be very good at hiring good people. And then you run into a few things that are just very expensive if they're only for one company, the cost of disaster recovery, especially for one small company. So we have found that one of the things that has made us successful is that every year we have driven down unit costs significantly, and that makes it important to have major costs, such as systems, be as close to fixed as possible in an environment where we're growing rapidly, because that's the easiest way to drive down unit costs. It's much harder in a stagnant environment. But we've been very pleased with the way it has been working up to this time. We decided, next slide, we decided a little over a year ago that we needed to replace the system that we were on, and we checked with a number of the major vendors that provide life insurance policy administration systems. A few we met face-to-face, others we communicated more by phone. We picked two, one of which was the Vector system, as worth seeing some demonstrations of how they would operate and how we thought it would fit with our business needs, and ultimately selected the Vector system. Since we don't have a staff to operate it, we found that most of the vendors we talked with didn't have companies like ours as their target. They tended to be wanting to deal with companies that already had large IT staffs and then wanted to basically sell a license and expect the company to operate the system. In our case, that just wasn't a very good fit. The other alternative we found for companies that would provide somewhat the same services here was that they wanted fixed unit pricing, namely that the price depended on how many policies you have in force. If you're growing rapidly, that's not a very attractive pricing mechanism, and we wanted something that we could lock in and get to a comparatively fixed price for long periods of time in advance, because we do believe we'll keep having the high growth in number of policies and premium, and this should give us regular and recurring declines in unit IT costs, and that's very important to operation as we are running it today. In terms of what we've actually transferred, again, we're still small. We had 30,000 policies that needed to be converted. Our conversion took place at December 31 of 2008. It was a successful conversion, certainly in the context of nothing terrible happened, and I think we all know that on a full policy conversion, there's always a risk of things happening, and this went smoothly. Obviously, you still scramble quite a bit to make sure that all the little things work as well as the big things, but in this case, we've been able to keep even the little things largely out of the eyes of the customers and agents. They've been things that we could see them and anticipate and fix before anything got any further. And again, no heroic or no major kinds of problems that we had to deal with. We have, by size here, we've got somewhat over 500 funeral homes that we deal with. We simultaneously made some sizable improvements to our website, and we now can supply that field force with a great deal more information through the website than we ever could in the past. So they are seeing this as a very favorable event. They can see much more in terms of their own policy persistency, their sales, whether a policy is pending, whether a death claim is pending. If they're a manager, they can look at all of the agents under them to see what kind of progress they are having as well. So we're not done. Since it only happened 6 weeks ago, you can hardly say that that a conversion is totally complete, and we'll be doing some things along these lines for probably at least another couple months or more, and it'll be an ongoing thing. But it's been a good transition, and I think that's in part that we found a very professional team that we're dealing with. They were able to respond to our needs, and in this sense, not just IT needs. You need somebody who has some understanding of your business and of the insurance business, so that when you'd have issues of primary interest to actuaries, at least we're dealing with people who understand how actuaries think, and who can look at a prior block of business and how it can be turned into the new systems that we needed. The thing we believe we're going to get that will be the most valuable, and we need to finish conversion first, but this system appears to be much quicker to market than what we had before. In the past, we've had some long delays every time we had a new product, and that can be a detriment in the marketplace, especially if you're not the leader in the marketplace and sometimes have to react to what other companies might have done. And this appears to be something that we can do much more with non-IT staff and not rely as much on somebody rewriting a program every time we try to do anything that's a little bit different. So I would say at this point, we feel pleased with the way it has operated in this last 6 weeks of live, and 6 months prior to that getting ready to go live. And I think it's going to help us both from a cost point of view and similarly from a reaction time and ability to serve the customers. And with that, I thank you for listening, and I can take questions as they may come.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate the comments. Speaking of questions, I'll remind our attendees that if you have a question for Tom or Craig, or for our further speaker when I introduce him, Erik Stockwell, that just go ahead and type it into the question and answer box pane, and we'll be watching for your questions as they come in, and then we'll try and get to as many of those as we possibly can. I do want to, before I introduce Erik, I'd like us to engage the audience yet once again and get some feedback as far as this particular polling question. The question is, what is the most important capability you look for while choosing an ASP vendor? Is it long-term viability, implementation experience, security and backup facilities, experienced team with deep domain expertise, flexibility and ease of doing business, overall costs and fees, or other? Okay, the question is, what is the most important capability you look for while choosing an ASP vendor, application service provider vendor? And no vote is really not an option, but long-term viability is implementation experience, security and backup facilities, experienced team with deep domain expertise, flexibility and ease of doing business, overall costs and fees, or other. Okay, votes are still coming in, so I'm going to give it about another 15 seconds or so. Just mark the box, the colored box, and then we'll be able to take a look at this. Okay, now it's slowed down. All right, Ryan, you can go ahead and close the polls, and let's take a look at those results. Okay, 10% say long-term viability, 10% say implementation experience, 10% say security and backup facilities. 36% of you say experienced team with deep domain expertise. That's quite telling. Okay, 21% said flexibility and ease of doing business, and 10% said overall costs and fees. And thank you, no one said no vote. That's what we were going for. And it's my pleasure now to move on to our next speaker, who is Erik Stockwell from Majesco. Erik, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Pat. I'd just like to circle back on the perfect storm mentioned by Pat and Craig. It really does mean that carriers must invest their limited capital efficiently and avoid projects with uncertain future values. Predictable spending will be a critical factor in taking innovative steps to improve operational efficiencies. Currently topping the list of insurance carrier concerns include things like growth in a flat market, customer service excellence with less resources, oncoming increased regulatory oversight, risk management discipline, and systems integration needs, all at a low total cost of ownership. And many carriers have struggled to find the ideal balance of these competing needs. Carriers are beginning to view external systems providers with broader capabilities, larger technical resource bases, and geographically diverse cost structures as a good avenue to advance these complex set of goals. And what we've heard in both Craig and Tom's comments is the stresses the need for companies to understand how the underpinnings of their business can drive IT solutions that meet the real business need. These solutions enable carriers to address their concerns and wring every bit of risk-adjusted ROI out of the company. Now, why do I say risk-adjusted ROI? That's because pricing an insurance product includes dealing with many risks like mortality, longevity, morbidity, and claims experience, to be sure. But pricing also includes an element of expense risk that only appears over time and should inform IT decisions like building or buying and customizing policy administration solutions. There are three real expense risks that are faced today that should inform these decisions: maintenance cost assumptions, sales projections, and demographics. Many insurers are spending more than 60% of their IT budgets on maintenance of current systems. Insurance products are priced with a specific assumption about the cost of ongoing maintenance. To the extent that the maintenance expense of systems comes in at or below these assumptions, the insurance carrier wins financially through economies of scale. However, pricing assumptions related to maintenance expense can become risky due to volatile labor costs, lack of technical knowledge, systems out of warranty, and customization that once installed requires significant work to keep current. Many carriers built systems internally or through heavy customization have inadvertently increased the risk that this maintenance cost assumption in product pricing will not hold up over time. The potential to move these expenses to a more predictable environment and provide carriers with an attractive alternative to the risks surrounding maintenance expense does exist. Let's talk about sales projections. Another important pricing assumption related to covering systems costs is sales forecasts. A weak or often overly optimistic sales forecast discipline can frequently lead to underestimating the cost of IT system installation, deployment, and maintenance. The industry's largest carriers may be able to afford some missteps in sales assumptions and still cover systems unit costs over the long term. However, for those beyond the very largest, sales projections are key to winning the unit cost fixed investment argument in the build or buy decision for policy administration systems. It is difficult to make a business case for build or buy when sales are down, which will most likely be the case for the industry in the near future. Insurers will need to discover ways to shift this sales assumption risk to technology providers in order to gain a more solid and predictable financial costing basis. Now let's look at demographics. For an insurance industry that is facing generation attrition, it is more difficult to recruit and retain workers who understand existing processes and systems. Employees who are familiar with the insurance carrier's mature IT environment are becoming harder and harder to find. As these employees begin to retire, how will the industry fill the knowledge gap related to these existing systems? This is an industry situation that's not unique to the IT function. Carriers are struggling with demographic realities around a shrinking pool of experienced agents and knowledgeable underwriters as well. However, there is one difference in these trends. Carriers have always been comfortable with outsourcing distribution to independent producers. More recently, carriers have become comfortable with outsourcing underwriting. On the IT front, however, carriers have had a limited comfort level with the outsourcing concept. They've outsourced low-value programming resources and are using these solutions for staff augmentation without taking advantage of the larger financial opportunities. The impending demographic shift in IT knowledge workers that Craig mentioned may move carriers to explore high-value, financially significant, and mission-critical outsourcing in ways that they now use underwriters and distributors. These high-value solutions can provide the financial impact to drive profitability and answer top-of-mind concerns. So what are we to do? Insurance companies have difficulty finding a single solution that meets the needs for flexibility, functionality, and user-friendliness at a predictable, low-risk price. Balancing insurers' concerns for growth, service, regulation, and risk management make choices for mission-critical applications difficult to weigh. How can we as an industry fix maintenance costs in line with assumptions, share services across multiple customers to gain true economies of scale, and shift the risk of these assumptions away from the carrier? In these economic times, a strong case can be made for using a hosted ASP platform to manage software applications. The ASP technology provider can access a deep pool of technology resources and a diverse cost structure to provide predictability and reduce the risk for a carrier. ASP solutions evolved out of the concept of service bureaus developed in the late 1960s and 1970s. Service bureaus were developed at a time to enable small and medium-sized businesses to access the computing power afforded to large companies, but at a fraction of the cost of implementing these systems themselves. Since 2005, the proliferation of web services capabilities, particularly the development of core XML standards, have resulted in a new age for insurance carriers' abilities to take advantage of ASP tools without the concerns of loss of control or data. Moving mission-critical functions from in-house requires that these new tools are used and that companies develop a clear understanding and documented process around the ASP involvement. Since an IT vendor hosts the system, the user is assured of stability, security, and a long-term low-risk solution. The carrier can shift the cost and risk of time service, around-the-clock support, disaster recovery, and technical upgrades of software and hardware to the service provider who is in the business of providing exactly these solutions. Because these costs are offered at shared services business models, the costs are spread over a number of carrier clients who gain access to the significant expertise developed by the ASP provider over multiple engagements. In addition to these benefits, a key advantage is that the model reduces per-policy cost of administration for maintenance costs and makes it affordable to a wide variety of insurers. Because of this pricing model, the ASP solution is fully scalable with the cost in proportion to the insurer's size. An ASP solution can provide a carrier with more control over their business, even though they often fear the opposite. Control is gained through tight service level agreements with the vendor, clearly defining service levels and levying economic consequences on the vendor for any underperformance. Additionally, the ability to set fixed costs, the carrier can gain control over the performance. They also gain control over budgeting, spending levels in a way that's not possible with build or buy options. With ASP, a carrier can eliminate many of the uncertainties that transfer much of the maintenance and integration risks and costs to a vendor with this expertise. This transfer can free up a carrier's resources to focus on more strategic initiatives for building the business along the lines of what Craig laid out in his presentation. Let's take a quick look at some cost comparisons. Now, this is not an actual example, but it's designed to give you an indication of the savings potential with ASP. You'll note immediately that the ASP environment takes the license fee right off the top, which can be an extremely large part of an overall bid from a vendor. You'll also note that hardware, software, and disaster recovery are largely stable across solutions due to the external nature of these costs. However, the labor and effort to install and manage these systems is relieved from the carrier. The resource costs through an ASP can be significantly less due to the shared services model, and the potential exists to get deeper technical capabilities at a much lower cost. Now, insurers have a rich vendor market from which to select when considering providers of policy administration solutions. How can an insurer have the confidence that their business needs will be understood, that their critical functions will be performed in this ASP environment? Domain expertise, as we saw in the last vote, is one of the most important considerations in choosing an ASP provider that a company can trust. Here are some additional key factors that differentiate best practice companies from others in the policy administration field and are important qualities that carriers should expect to access from top-tier ASP companies. First, skilled IT professionals who have worked in the industry, understand internal processes and systems from the insurer's point of view, and can align technology solutions with the business strategies. Second, the financial stability of the ASP provider and the recognition that the company will be well positioned for the future, given the long-term nature of the underlying insurance business. Third, a partnership mentality focused on enabling long-term relationships and creating trust with business users and producers, as well as the IT staff. Fourth, a technical architecture that is compatible with enterprise standards and the assurance that the ASP provider has the internal IT staff with the skills to support it. And finally, a shared services model that reduces operating costs, training time, and recruiting efforts. As you can see from this slide, MajescoMastek is exactly this kind of company, providing domain knowledge, financial stability, and technical expertise. So in conclusion, some of the greatest potential of IT is the ability to create bottom-line impact through increased productivity, reduce risk through the enablement of new business models, and generate predictable costs through innovative use of technology delivery. In today's turbulent times, flexible and innovative solutions to meet the current concerns of insurers are a must. Insurance companies can expect to see even greater transformation in the way they do business and increased competition for growth over the next few years. Today's challenge is finding a way to access advanced IT capabilities when uncertainty and unpredictability make large capital investments imprudent, if not impossible, especially for all but the largest of carriers. One response to these challenges is the strategic outsourcing of ASP. It's a proven solution whose time has come. Thank you for your time, and I'll turn it back over to Pat for questions.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Just so you know, we're rounding into, it doesn't say Q&A there, but we are going to be rounding into our Q&A session now. We've got a number of questions in the queue already, so I'm going to get right to it so we can get to as many of these as we can. The first question, I'm assuming, goes to Craig Weber from Celent. It says, it sounds like you're a proponent of software as a service generally, but other than the success of Google and applications that you mentioned, such as Salesforce.com, what makes you think that insurance applications fit the model? Craig?
Well, other than the kind of the swirl of technology trends that I talked about that I think all are clearly taking place in insurance and point toward software as a service, I think it's kind of useful to turn the question around and say, why not ASP, software as a service, for insurance? You know, look at what the traditional objection points to not hosting your own solution locally might be. And I think most insurance carriers, as you talk through this and push on it and just kind of play devil's advocate with them, I think they start to say, well, yeah, well, maybe you're right. There is no real good reason why we can't do this. And if there are compelling reasons to do it and a lack of compelling reasons not to do it, that kind of makes the decision make sense. So I think the model clearly is evolving. It clearly works, and the scalability and other issues like that are being addressed very nicely by some of the major well-known players like Salesforce and Google. But for insurance-specific applications, I think we are right on the cusp of proving this out on a grand scale.
Okay, thanks, Craig. Yeah, that's very interesting. And I did see that we had a question also for Tom that had come in, and it was, let's see, Tom, was integration with back-end systems such as billing, commission management, et cetera, a problem in the ASP model?
No, I mean, I think, in fact, that's one reason why we are in this model is that they are better integrated than they would be under most of the other kinds of alternatives that I can think of that we would be rationally considering. So it has been, thus far, again, it's a short history. We've only been converted 6 weeks, but it seems to have fit very nicely together.
Okay, good. The next question is, it looks like it actually could be, I think it's for Erik, as I'm reading this now. It says, apart from the cost factor, what other advantages would an ASP solution offer over an in-house solution?
Well, and I think that's one of the things that, a cost factor is important, but it's really not the main driver that you should see here. One is that really you are reducing the risk overall to the company by putting it with a provider who is really in the business of providing the technology, the hardware, the software, the data center environments that are fully scalable. So you're moving those capabilities into a center of excellence on those types of environments, and cost is a nice outcome from that. I think along the lines of the prior question can also provide some information as to the other benefits as well, where we looked at an environment like Tom's, and a lot of these things were capable having them all built into the existing system. So you were able to run a lot of this integrated into one set of applications in the ASP environment. But if you move out into another company that might have a different set of capabilities or needs, and you do have billing sitting externally or a commission system sitting externally, somebody who understands the Core XML standards, the ability to send this data back and forth, and has done this a few times, really does have a capability to provide that level of integration of passing the information both internal to the ASP environment and then getting it back out into some other systems that you may be running internally. So there's a lot of business process benefits that come out of this as well.
Okay. I'd ask Tom to weigh in on this also.
And I think it's a very good question. I think especially in the small company environment, but I suspect it's almost equally true with a much larger company, that our needs vary widely from the highest level of systems activity we might have at one point in time during a year to the lowest points. It would be nearly impossible for us to staff for that. If we tried to staff for the peaks, we would have incredible costs, and if we only staff for the valleys, then we're going to back up whenever we get to those peak needs. I would far rather push that problem to Erik.
Okay, well, we did have another question come in while you were talking just now, and it's this one would be applied to, looks like Craig. What are the strategies applied to reduce reliance/dependence on core technology? He's referring to your slide on IT trends.
Okay. If I'm understanding that question right, the reliance on core technology. I guess maybe what he's referring to. I had some comment about componentization strategy, use of SOA and web services, and kind of a better ability in terms of technology to wall off core technology where appropriate. So in general, I think systems that were built 30 years ago were monolithic. Today we see them being much more componentized, and that really allows you to selectively get at components that you are seeking to, where you're seeking to replace the functionality, or integrate a best of breed approach. Take rating, billing, policy admin, document solutions from different providers. I mean, that's the kind of thing that I think reduces the drag of core systems. But again, my point in talking about those things is that it makes sense to consider them in the context of software as a service. This is yet another kind of an extension of those modernization trends.
Okay. Well, we have time for about one more question here. And actually, this question, I think I could throw it open for discussion. This is the kind of question that an editor would typically ask. And it says, if I elect to run a mission-critical application such as policy administration in an ASP environment, who owns the data? And how can a client ensure that the data is protected? Let's start with Erik. Erik, you want to
Sure.
your response?
And not only a question that an editor would ask, but it's a question that we get asked every time we talk with a client or potential customer. It is a very important piece of this overall puzzle, and we go at it a couple of different ways. One is that you really need to understand the partner that you're dealing with and make sure that you do have some contractual capability to know that the data that we're running for you is your data. And this is something that, you know, we're not an insurance company. We don't expect to have need to be running anything from an insurance company standpoint in terms of holding on to data and then reusing it somewhere else. This is really an environment we're using to better your processes and help you along the line of doing what it is that you're trying to do. So from a data standpoint, first of all, contractually make sure that it is yours. Second of all, you do want to segregate this data into, depending on how you want to set up the environment, you can set it into separate servers or you can set it into separate data warehouses so that you do have all of this well-defined and you have security around it, making sure that your data is not commingled with anybody else. And again, that's largely looking at the types of services and types of cost structures that you'd like to have and protections around your data. I'll kind of throw it to Tom and Craig as well.
Tom, how did you strategize around this when you were first examining and doing your vendor review? Was this something that came up right away?
It came up fairly quickly, and I think at one level you try to write contracts that protect you as well as you can be protected. At another level, you finally have to have a certain level of confidence and faith in your partner on the deal, because certainly those of us who don't make a living in IT would not be as capable as maybe some others to really know how good the safeguards are, so that you talk to the references, you talk to you don't ask competitors directly, but you kind of listen to see what you think you're hearing from different vendors on that subject. But I think it's one of the lawyers try to protect you, and you do that sort of thing, but it's mostly that you have to have some confidence in the partner.
Sure. Craig, do you want to weigh in on this, and then we can wrap things up?
Sure. I just think it's reminiscent of questions about outsourcing generally, and what I like to remind people is that whether you've outsourced a process or outsourced a system or run it yourself or are using different kinds of integration partners for different pieces, you have to have these safeguards in place yourself, internally, or in your interactions with third parties. So there's no real difference if that server is running within your four walls or without. You still need to have essentially the same discipline applied to the process and to the data protection and data security.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you. And, unfortunately, we have run out of time, and we've had just a great discussion today. I want to thank our speakers, Craig Weber, Tom Hardy, and Erik Stockwell, for